Hey everyone, welcome to Dulles. My name is Andrew. I'm the student pastor here, and if you're joining us online, if you're watching this in person, a really big welcome. We are so glad that you joined us today. All right, I've got quite a few announcements, so I'm going to get right into it. The first one is that ourselves, Dulles Church, and a local North Point partner church in Reston are going to be hosting a worship night. It's going to be at their church in Reston. It's going to be on May 25th. That's a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. We'd love if you're able to. I know it's a weekday night. If you can join us, that'd be great. So all the details are on our app and on our website. At the end of this month, Memorial Day weekend, May 29th, we are not going to be meeting at Lightridge High School. We are going to be meeting at 50 West Winery for church at the winery. We're going to be taking communion there and just have a great time of hangout afterwards. If you have a friend who you've been wanting to invite to church, maybe a little bit skeptical about going into a building, that would call themselves a church, this is a great time and a great place to invite them to come out. Everybody loves wine and hanging out, so this is the perfect place to do that. Last week, Brad gave a message about the church and building the church and what that actually looks like. And he gave 4 ways that you can get more involved in that process, in building the church. For some of you, the first one, maybe just to download the app, to be able to get more involved, to be more in the know of what's going on, to see all the things that are happening at Dulles Church. Get connected with us. If you watch online, we have a lot of people who watch from different places. If you watch online, be more involved in the chat. Talk back and forth with our chat hosts and the other people that are watching church online. Make them feel welcome as well. And if you live in the Nova area and you've been watching online and you haven't really come back to the building, being more involved in building a church looks like coming back to the building, being in community physically with us and being able to build the church that way. Second one is to continue generously giving. Now, Brad's message is going to be on that, so I'm not going to say anything about that, but just to continue giving. The third one is that this summer, for a handful of Wednesday nights, Brad is going to be talking about why this is the most exciting idea on earth. Building the church, being a part of the church is the most exciting idea ever. You can find the details for that on the app. There's no set dates yet, but you can just say that you're interested, and once those things are finalized, we'll let you know when and where those are going to be. And the last one is to join a team. If you feel or you would call Dulles Church your home, your next step is to join a team. And we have a lot of different areas you can serve. We have production. We have, if you like coffee, if you like greeting people, if you want to be behind a screen, if you want to be on stage, if you want to be doing stuff like this, hosting. We have plenty of teams for you to join. So you can go to our app and the whole list will be there. You can sign up for them. If you don't like it, try it out. You can move on to the next one. But your next step, if you call Dulles Church your home, of being involved in building the church, is to join a team. And speaking of teams, I just want to give a big shout out to Kim Pizzoli. She is our kids director. I've been working with Kim for a little bit now, and I've just watched as she has just taken the Dulles kids team from a small group to now this pretty significantly large group. I think maybe like 6 people when we first started, and now she's maybe at 15 volunteers. And so she's grown that group to create a great environment. If you have kids, to create a great environment for your kids. Volunteers that are just so invested in your kids' lives. They're not burned out, and they're just wanting to be there. They're excited to be there. So if you have a kid, or if you don't, and you see Kim in the hallway today, give her a big high five and tell her great job, and thank her for all that she's doing for Dulles Church through our Dulles Kids program. All right, those are the announcements, guys. I know it was a lot. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm glad that you're here. Pay attention. Brad has a really great and provoking and compelling message for us. I love you guys, and I will see you next week.
Hey, today at Lightridge, we are appointing Andrew as an official pastor. We couldn't do this logistically online, but I wanted to share the excitement with you. So we hired Andrew a year and a half ago as our student pastor, but he has just been a phenomenal right-hand person to me. He's really been fantastic to work with. And there is a spiritual precedent in the New Testament of somebody being recognized in calling, like called by God in the the lifestyle of shepherding people toward faith. And we just see that gift in Andrew. It's called ordaining or pastor ordination, which is super formal. We're going to invite the church at Lightridge to gather with us and pray for Andrew and Jesse and their family and recognize him as a pastor. And we just want to share the excitement with you. Okay, here we go. Wherever you're walking, let me say that again. Wherever you're watching from, we love meeting you like this every week. And if in some way these messages are inspiring to you and connecting you to God and spiritual life and what it means to be a church, part of the church, wherever you live, we love it. And we love that you're with us. Okay, so a pretty transparent story to start things off here today. My brother was in town last summer, and when it was just the four of us, our parents said to Brian and me, hey, we want to talk to you guys. And it sounded kind of serious, and we were like, are you guys okay? Their health has been relatively good for all these years, which we're so grateful for. But they said that we want to talk to you about the day when it comes when we die. And we were like, what? And it was emotional. This conversation was sad. It was somber, but it was also really profound. And that's the profound part's the reason I'm telling you this story. So they said, yeah, we want to just talk to you about details of the house, some financials. We want to show you a file drawer in a cabinet that we have. And, by Northern Virginia standards, definitely, my parents would not be considered very wealthy. I mean, that's a relative term, but not at all. There's some people I know that would probably think, wow, yeah, they're not very wealthy. But they wanted to talk about the house that they own, that they've paid for, and how they've worked hard to save a modest amount that they hope to be able to pass down to Brian and me, depending on healthcare needs and that kind of thing. And so we had this conversation, and we realized, wow, you guys have a good amount of savings where you could travel some. You guys could do a couple of big trips you've never done before. Do like an exotic vacation that you've never done, maybe a couple weeks or a few weeks in Europe kind of thing. And they said, yeah, maybe we will. They've traveled some. We might do that again, but we really are trying to save this to pass on to you boys. And if you guys end up using it in some way for the grandkids, that would make us happy. So, again, just to be clear, we're not talking about millions. We're not even talking about $500,000. We're talking about a modest amount here. And it was so important to them to be protecting this savings to be able to pass on. They said, yeah, we're not sure we're going to travel much. We really want to leave you something. And my dad said, my dad's been retired about 5 or 6 years. He said, I work at the shoe center. He works at a shoe store for a friend of his that owns a shoe store in Winchester. Since my dad's been retired, he works there on Tuesdays. And we know he loves people and interacting with the same people every week, and it keeps Dad busy. But he said, beyond all of that, I'm actually trying to use some extra cash to protect that savings to pass on to you guys. And I've always known this about my parents. This is what was so profound. And it became really clear in this conversation that they don't see their retirement or their checking account, their house, as something they own. They see these things as managers. They look at their possessions as managers. They're managing it for someone else. And so my brother and I, after the emotion and this hard conversation and, conversation where we're thankful to God that we still have them, we both said the same thing. We want to have you guys for many more years. We hope we do. But when this inheritance becomes ours, it won't be ours. Brian said this, and I was thinking the same thing, and I said my version of this. We will then be managing your inheritance to us for someone else. Brian's attitude was that, and it was certainly my thought. We will be managing this for our parents' grandkids. And so is life in the space and realm and presence and activity that Jesus calls his kingdom. There may be no more serious subject that Jesus puts you and I face to face with than money and how we think about money. Now, just preface here on this message. What precipitated or led to this message? So our church, what led to this is budget. Our directional team and I felt like, we rarely talk about money. We don't talk about the church budget much. It's managed very well, but I forget when I'm supposed to remind everybody, thank you for your giving, or hey, be investors here. We didn't mention it on Easter Sunday. Strategically, churches and pastors talk about this, the biggest Sunday of the year. Don't forget to mention giving is important here, and you can be a giver. We didn't mention it on Easter. And we did really well through the pandemic. We had the scare and the very real stress of, oh, wow, we're watching, for a year or more online, and will people just drop off, and will giving stop? And I'm just so proud of you and thankful for you. All of us, Amy and I, all of us together just stayed so committed. And so we got through this pandemic when churches were, in some cases, closing and struggling so much financially. We really met the budget. In fact, we were able, because of you and all of us and our giving and our commitment here, we were able to hire Andrew in the middle of the pandemic. I don't know of any churches that hired anybody during the pandemic. And that's just worked out so great. And we finished last quarter on budget. The last quarter of last year on budget. October, November, December. And then January, we started to see a slip where that's happened all over the country. And our giving dropped in January, February, and the first quarter of this year. All 3 months. And so we talked about, let's talk to the church about giving. And I decided, hey, let's go beyond just meeting the church's budget, resourcing our church well, and let's talk about the plan that God has for us that's so clear in the scripture of us not just being wealth builders, but wealth managers, how he sees us as managers, not so much as owners. All right, so to get there, I'm going to tell you this about something Jesus says that's shocking to people. I've read so many storytellers and teachers for years. Historians and astronomers, and like you, I read David McCullough, world-renowned historian. Ron Chernow is just fantastic. I just downloaded Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Leadership in Turbulent Times. I've read Malcolm Gladwell for years, the really respected writer at the New Yorker, and there's the Patrick Lencioni's, the business consultants, who's people who are phenomenal storytellers. And the list goes on and on. And never have I felt so strongly that Jesus was the greatest teacher who's ever lived. Ingenious how Jesus connects us to the reality of the human condition and what he means by kingdom of God invading this world and our role in it, and how he looks at outsiders with mercy and love, and how he looks at arrogant, self-righteous religious insiders. And in all of his teaching, and this may shock you, like it shocked me years ago, the first time I heard this and understood this, that in all of Jesus' words and all of his teachings, he talked about money more than any other subject, more than sex or heaven and eternity. Jesus referred to or illustrated or talked directly to how we think about and approach money. It's fascinating that this was the primary teaching element or focus of his teaching when you consider the quantitative body of Jesus' words. And in fact, he taught 36 parables. Jesus used the fable-like illustrations to help us see or understand the reality of his kingdom. He used 36 of those stories. 16 of them were about money. And yet, he never asked for money. His point wasn't, hey, I'm here to collect money. Jesus never asked for money. We have no record of him asking. Now, the apostles would, and we're going to look at an example here where Paul is challenging Timothy, this pastor, to teach the church about giving and what generosity looks like and taking care of the needs of the church. But Jesus' point was not, hey, I need you to give to me. his point was something that transcends what you and I typically think about or how we see the world. Jesus understood that money, unlike any other topic or any other circumstance on this planet, money has the unmatched power to reveal the true condition of the human heart. This is why he referenced it so much. Jesus knows how money can reveal how we identify ourselves or where we find worth or the nature of what scares us or how we hold on to control. Money can reveal so much about how we look at the world and look at ourselves and how we think. In a 2017 Forbes article, Ron Blue tells the story of what changed the trajectory of his life. Ron Blue is a world-renowned financial consultant. In the 1970s, he had an experience that moved him towards financial planning and helping individuals and families and companies manage their wealth well in healthy ways, not to see or view your resources as something you own, but something you're managing. And he's renowned in all kinds of circles. And in this article about 5 years ago, he tells a story of how in the 1970s, he visited a friend of his in Africa. This was a village leader who was a pastor of a church there. He had never been to Africa, never visited his friend. He gets to the village and realizes that his friend lives in a mud hut. And he wasn't shocked by that, but he was a little surprised. And after being, I think if I remember right, he spent about a week in this village. He asked his friend, Ron Blue asked his friend, what's the greatest challenge of the villagers here? What do people struggle with the most? And his friend's answer shocked him. His friend said, yeah, what our people struggle with the most here is always wanting more, never having enough. Ron was like, what? Ron describes in the article that, he always craving more, never being satisfied or content with something in the Northern Hemisphere or a problem of particularly the Northwestern Hemisphere, North America or the United States. He had never for a second thought this was a complaint or an issue or problem in the Southern Hemisphere or particularly the Southeast, the continent of Africa. And so his friend elaborated in detail and he gave him this example. He said, yeah, just when somebody finally gets a mud hut or builds a mud hut, or maybe the village or some friends help them build this mud hut, they're not in that mud hut very long at all before they start complaining about wanting a cow manure hut. Now, sidebar here, I would have thought before understanding the story that a mud hut would have been a promotion, a step up from a cow manure hut, but that's not the case. Huts made out of manure and urine actually resist rain and water better. And so he was explaining how, villagers are always complaining. They get a mud hut of their own, and in no time at all, they're wanting a cow manure hut. And then they're in a hut made out of manure that doesn't leak and is rainproof, and they want a hut made out of stone. And of course, I'm thinking, well, of course, I would want that for anybody. I can relate. And he goes on to talk about roofs. Just when somebody gets a thatch roof, they don't even enjoy it before they start talking about how I really wish I had a metal roof or a tin roof. And the problem, you and I are probably responding the same way. When I first heard this story years ago, and then I read it, in the Forbes article, I'm thinking I want every single person in that village in the 1970s to have a stone house, a house made out of rock and not out of mud. But Ron's takeaway was it's a universal issue of the human heart, always wanting more, never having enough. I want to read a quick part before we get to Jesus. This is a challenge that the Apostle Paul is putting in front of Timothy. Timothy's a very young pastor in this metropolitan city. The church is new, it's growing, and Paul is trying to level set that young church with the heart of Jesus by saying this. Yet true godliness being caring for and living for the things that matter to God in his character, yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. For we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. And we know this. We know this, and yet it deserves repeating. At funerals and looking back at somebody's life, and in the holidays when we're remembering somebody and sharing memories, we never talk about the kind of stuff they had. We just don't talk about, and then they went from an apartment to a condo or a townhouse, the starter home, and then they ended up in a bigger house, or the kinds of cars they drove, and they ended up with this kind of car. We always talk about the kind of person someone was. Paul goes on to say to Timothy, Pastor Timothy here, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. I think it's so interesting that when two of the richest people in American history were asked the question, how much is enough? They said the same thing. I'm reading Ron Chernow's book, Titan, about John D. Rockefeller, and it's actually softened me about Rockefeller. I just thought he was more maniacal and self-consumed. He was a complicated person, and he was worth, now get this, this is how his worth is described by somebody in U.S. News. They said that John D. Rockefeller today, his net worth today would make Warren Buffett and Bill Gates look like middle class. That's how wealthy Rockefeller was in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He was worth 1% of all U.S. dollars. Of all the American economy or U.S. worth, Rockefeller was worth 1% of all of it. And when asked the question, how much is enough, Rockefeller famously said, a little bit more. And it's exactly how Howard Hughes answered the question. You know, the famous, eccentric, complex billionaire from California. When he was asked the question, how much is enough, he said, he's known for saying, just a little bit more. It's remarkable how this is a universal craving of the human heart. And for us, particularly here in Northern Virginia, America's been described with inflation going on and all the challenges happening right now financially. We're still considered the wealthiest generation of any generation in human history. And here we are in Northern Virginia, one of the very wealthiest places in the United States. And so just keep this in mind as we continue. Paul says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Paul is not saying here that money is evil. Not for a second. Jesus never says this. In fact, there are characters in Scripture who are obviously called to be wealthy. And you could even argue that people in wealthier parts of the world, like here, are actually expected to be wealth managers. And that's certainly the way I look at you and look at us, that we are managers of resources that much of the world has never thought about having at their disposal or in front of them or under their care. Nowhere does Jesus or anywhere in Scripture imply that a house or certain size house is evil, or the kind of car you drive is evil, or certain income levels are evil. The point here is that the human heart, the nature of the human heart is to always want more. That is the problem. And that's the problem that Jesus addresses and why he speaks to money so much. The central reality of what Jesus is trying to do, he's trying to awaken us to see the craving of the human heart and what he craves and what he wants for us and what we were really designed to be in terms of wealth, which we're getting to. Last part here of Paul's instruction to Pastor Timothy. Teach those, this is what he's supposed to teach to those who are wealthy in this metropolitan city in the church, the followers of Jesus in this church. Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. He's not saying don't work. We're instructed to work hard, to labor hard at our jobs. We're instructed to save for the future. It's wise to be thinking about our families and saving for retirement and those kinds of things. That's not what Paul's getting at here. He's talking about how to think about our wealth or our resources or our paychecks, our possessions. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works, in generosity, to help those in need, always being ready to share with others. This phrase, to be rich, that followers of Jesus should be rich in generosity, is powerful. And it's antithetical to how you and I have been raised or thought. It's opposite of what we see in the news and in entertainment and how we're taught in school. That our resources are about being rich in generosity. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future age so that they may experience life that is true life. The pursuit of more robs us from a lifestyle of generosity, from a mentality. Always wanting more robs us from the mentality of generosity. Now, one quick thing that King Solomon says here, before we get to a story about Jesus, that Jesus gives us. Solomon says, one of the wealthiest men who's ever lived, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. It's fascinating that Solomon uses the word meaningless here about craving more, never being satisfied. My income's always got to be higher. And Solomon's not saying you shouldn't care about your income increasing. You shouldn't care about pay raises or working hard at your job or getting promoted. That's not what anyone in Scripture is saying. They're saying that anybody who centers their life around accumulating more to define themselves or to provide for their security, it's meaningless if you live life to own rather than to manage for someone else. It's interesting he uses the word meaningless because meaning is exactly why we focus so much in our culture. So much of the world focuses on money. The belief that money and what money can buy is what provides meaning is held by so many people. It's a very commonly human thought that money provides meaning. What money can buy provides meaning. It's so easy as kids growing up in our culture, in our country, to believe that. You might even be questioning, well, okay, what does provide meaning? Okay, we're going to get there with something that Jesus says here. In Luke 16, Jesus has just finished a parable about a man who was the manager of an estate for a rich person. And it's a really complex story. It's a fascinating story. He has everybody on the edge of their seat. And now he's explaining the parable. So this is Luke 16:10. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Okay, like the people here that Jesus is talking to are like, who's he talking about? And what's worldly wealth? What other kind of wealth is there? We're managing, this is the point of Jesus' story, like the man in the story, we are managers of what belongs to someone else. When you choose to follow Jesus, you surrender your life to Jesus, you are surrendering this world back to him. Include your world, you're surrendering your world to him, including your possessions, what you own, what you earn, your job. This doesn't mean we leave and go and give our house away and we stop driving a car. No, God cares about the house you live in. He just wants the house that you live in to be managed for his purposes and what he has in mind. Your pay raises to be managed as his, belonging to him, and how it will impact people. And we continue. And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? This is about moving from the mindset of, wow, God is entrusting me. He has entrusted me with the responsibility. The possessions that I call mine, they're actually his. And we never have the moment in life to live significantly and live a meaningful, truly meaningful life if everything that we see in front of us is ours, or we're trying to own more. No one can serve two masters, Jesus says. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus knows this. He knows you cannot live your life centered on money, and money being what defines you and what protects you and what provides your security, and also live the adventure of what God has called you to to be generous and someone who invests in others and lives your life for the sake of others. Jesus knows that money has the unmatched ability to reveal the true condition of the human heart. And what's natural for the human heart is to be pulled towards seeing money and all that money can buy as meaningful. And Jesus tells us it's the opposite in his kingdom, in his realm. Now that you and I, followers of Jesus, and many of us are now not just receiving from him and being shaped and changed by his character, but we're also beginning step by step, little by little, to extend his kingdom, his reality, his character, his love, his intentions, his view of the future into the darker and broken and hurtful places in this world. And so for us, what makes something meaningful, what makes anything meaningful in life is when it is a means to an end. This is actually the true definition of meaning. Something is meaningful when it is literally a means to an end. Andy Stanley said in his book, If Money Could Talk, if you want to have a meaningful life, your life must become a means to an end that is not you. If you want to actually live a meaningful life, you must become a means to an end that isn't you. Now, a couple of years ago, Amy and I went to some good friend's house, live, really close here. We had dinner one night, and Paul said, hey, after dinner, he said, hey, I'll be right back. Went out to the garage and comes back riding in his kitchen on a Segway Mini. And I had seen a Segway Mini. I've never been on a Segway before at that point. And he's riding around his kitchen and into the living room, and we're just all freaking out, and it's just this fun moment. And then I try it, and I picked it up pretty quick, and I fell in love. It was like love at first sight. I'm just riding for 15, 20 minutes. I'm riding around his kitchen island and in the living room. And so for my birthday, like a couple months later, Amy and the girls got me a Segway Mini. And Amy said it had barely been used, and it was as good as new, and this is it. And I loved it. And we took it out in the street, and everybody took a turn, and I showed it off to my neighbors and anybody who comes over. I, spin circles in the living room and then let them have a chance, and it's fun. But this is what I've discovered about the Segway is it has no meaning. Now, to get technical, it means a lot to me because Amy and the girls gave it to me. So it does have sentimental meaning to me. But by definition, it's only meaningful if it's a means to an end. And I have still not found a means to an end for my Segway. Now, I know cities do Segway tours. We do them here in DC. That's a means to an end. You could argue, well, if friends are coming over and having fun with it and there's laughter, well, that's a means to an end, but a means to an end towards something meaningful in someone's life. That's what actual meaning is. Meaning means to be a means to an end. And in America and so much of our world today, we don't see life this way. We don't look at our possessions this way. We don't look at our houses this way or our jobs or incomes as a means to a greater end. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts." And that's always why Jesus raises the issue of money. Time and time again in all the illustrations and the parables and his teachings. It is about getting to the core of the human heart and what controls us, what we allow to control us, and whether we see ourselves as owners of what belongs to us or whether we see ourselves as managers of what belongs to God. When you become a means to an end, your money will follow. Your resources will follow. The way you save, the way you invest will follow. You will invest as a manager. Amy and I, when we got married, we made the decision, as we had been taught by our parents. I'm so grateful for this. And I know this can be super challenging, but Amy and I, we made the commitment we are going to give away a percentage of our income. We decided then this is how we're going to live. We decided on the percentage, and we've done it all through our marriage. We decided we're going to live on a percentage of our income. We're going to give away a percentage of our income and live on the rest. And we've taught our girls this. Our girls do it. I know Reagan just a couple weeks ago mentioned her offering. She gives, Mackenzie and Reagan both give 10% of everything they earn to investing here at Dulles Church. I'm going to do a wedding at the end of the year for a young lady who grew up in our church and then moved away, and I'm so excited for them on the West Coast. I'm going to challenge them with this. Really consider giving away a percentage of your income consistently as part of your strategy and your budget, and more than strategy and budget, as your heart, to lean into this idea that we were designed to be generous managers, not collectors and hoarders or owners. Now, if this seems extreme to you, and it may, this idea of giving away a percentage just always, I'm going to argue this for you, to you. The reason why you should decide what percentage that you're going to live on, because everyone lives on a percentage of their income. Everybody does. So why not be intentional about it? Why not be intentional about how we're going to live outwardly focused as investors and live on the rest? Like Paul to Timothy and to Timothy's church, I want us here at Dulles to err on the side of generosity. If we're going to err, let's err. Let's teach our kids to err on the side of generosity. Not only does this help with resourcing our church and Dulles kids and the 45 middle school and high school and various budgets and ideas for growth and how we want to build this church and how we want you to build this church for one another and for outsiders who are yet to be here with us. More than anything, this practice, this principle keeps you and I in the seat of manager rather than owner. It has been so good for Amy and I. When you give away a percentage of your income, you're just more open-handed. When crises emerge, when there's stressful times in jobs or incomes, you're less controlling already. You're less fearful already. Now, before I wrap up here, just one point of clarity about the difference between giving and generosity. When Paul says, be rich in generosity, he's not talking about the American version of giving. Americans know how to give. We know how to respond when there's an earthquake or a crisis or a house fire or some need. America rises to those occasions, and our church does it. We've done it so well. We've just done it in 1 week with a project that we have in Poland to help refugees, and I'm sure there are going to be many more. But giving is about doing. Generosity, what Paul's talking about, generosity is about being. Giving is about something we do from time to time. Generous or generosity is about who you are and who God is creating us to be, who we're turning into as generous people. If you want to be generous when you have much, learn how to practice generosity when you have less. It's so easy when you have less, or you think, oh, Brad's talking to the wealthy people in church. God started challenging Amy and I when we were broke. I mean, it was a decision we made here. We don't want our hearts to be owners. We want to be managers. And we believe he'll increase our possessions and our incomes as managers of what he wants to use us to do in our church and in our community and in our world. So here's how I'm going to end today. The directional team and I have developed some charts, and we're not going to use those charts today. One of the charts is a 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. You know, to meet our budget, to be back on track, if two people or two families or two households increase their giving by $2,000 a month. And that might be shocking to you. It might be shocking to hear there are families that give $2,000 or more a month here at Dulles. If 4 individuals or families increase their giving by $1,000 a month, and if 6 individuals or households increased their giving by $500 a month, and 8 increased by $250, if 10 increased their giving by $100 a month, we'd be there. We'd be at our budget. There's another chart that gets us there too. Listen, we just believe we can just do this. Let's just do this. Let's have the conversations in our homes. Let's do the work of the budgeting, and let's solve this, and let's meet our budget, and let's be builders of this church, not just for our sakes and for the one another's that are already in Dulles Church, but also for the sake of those who have yet to join us, for the hurting and broken lives around us. Here's my challenge to you. If you haven't been at Dulles very long, if you don't know whether you can trust the church with your money, I get it. I grew up in the 80s. I grew up in the 1980s where pastor, and this is why I was so reluctant to talk about money for years, and I still don't mention the offering at times when I should. I grew up in an era where pastors, on TV at least, were famous for playing on people's emotions to give more. And that's so not what we want to be here. And if you don't know us that well, if you're new here, you're not sure you can trust, decide to give a percentage of your income to an organization that you trust. Make the decision that you are going to become a manager. You are going to step into this space that Jesus is describing, the space of the human heart that he wants to transform, where our possessions are not ours to own, they're ours to manage for him, where we see ourselves as a means to an end, what provides actual meaning to life, where you and I become a means to an end. For those of you who trust Dulles and this is your church home, invest with us here. Beyond just meeting our budget, help us to grow into the future. I love you guys. Let me pray with you. God, this can be a sensitive subject, and it can sometimes be perceived that somebody's invasively telling somebody how to use their money. I pray that we would see your heart, Jesus. We would understand your heart, that you have designed us to be a means to an end as part of your extension of love to this world, and that as followers of you, we're investors here in our church. May we be courageous and may we be generous in our giving. And God, we'll do everything for you and for your plan to love people. Amen. I love you guys. Thank you for being invested here in the lives of people, not just financially, but emotionally in the lives of people as caregivers and those who showed Jesus love so well. I love you guys a lot. I'm sure I'll see you online in some form or fashion this week, and I'll be speaking next week. I can't wait to see you then.